Welcome, everybody, to the EdTech podcast. My name is Scott Azar, and I am so excited to finally really start getting into what I was hoping this podcast would be about. My first episode was about all the crazy things that are going on between Google. Originally, what I thought was just New York State with the privacy concerns. I didn't realize how much bigger it is. In my second episode, I dove into making Google Slides interactive and looking at Google Docs. And that's a great episode too. If you didn't realize how much more Google Docs is added in Google Workspace, definitely go check out that episode. But this is really what I'm excited for. I'm excited to share what other teachers are doing with educational technology and also infuse that with best teaching practices, because there's a lot of stuff out there that honestly, it just is like, you just really wonder what people are doing out there. You know, it like, to me, it's, you look at what some people are doing and you're just, so I have two really amazing guests. I have been, not only was I so excited to record this and interview them, but it was even additional excitement because like I really wanted to learn more about how this all came about. And if you watch my episode 2, I mentioned that I was going to invite one teacher to talk about this really cool grid system that they made with Google Docs. What I came to find out a short time later was his co-teacher, who teaches 8th grade accelerated earth science for all, actually had a huge part in bringing this whole grid system to life. This thing, and I don't want to waste any more time, this thing is so cool. So just to give you a quick background, and they'll explain themselves and introduce themselves in a second, but what this episode is about is a hybrid grid system where they're taking a 10th grade class, which is earth science. They're teaching it to all students in 8th grade, and which typically might have been just like an honors kind of a class. Well, this is accelerated for all. So everybody goes and takes that class, which I already said. And what they did was do something that seems amazing. Like, I'm going to try it for next year. What they did was they made a grid system that is perfect for blended learning. So they have parts of the grid system where students are working self-paced. They added points of reflection. They added places for conferencing. They intentionally space out their curriculum or their unit. They have interleaving. I mean, the amount of stuff that's just like good teaching is just riddled throughout this entire episode. And what I thought was going to be like a 20-minute conversation ended up going for about an hour and a half. And so this is actually just part 1 of what I hope is going to be something that you share, because to me, this was just eye-opening. I mean, I was so excited to listen, and I don't even know if I feel like I could have just kept talking with them, because they are both so interesting. They're so knowledgeable. The passion is incredible. I'm just going to shut up. Without further ado, here is part 1 of episode 3, which is a self-paced hybrid grid system that you can bring to your classroom. And I can't wait to not only have you listen to it, but I will 100% be attaching a whole bunch of stuff in the show notes. If not in this episode, then I've already been given the okay that Greg is going to give me a bunch of stuff to put at least in the next episode, which will hopefully be out next week. So anyway, one last time, thank you so much for stopping by EdTech. If you like this episode, please share it with others, because I think it's amazing. A thumbs up, a follow, anything helps, and it's really appreciated. And enjoy today's episode. All right. So I am very excited to bring on my two first EdTech guests. We have Greg and Laurie, who are going to introduce themselves. And then I've mentioned their hybrid grid. I don't really know what you guys call it. So if you have like a better name, I just keep calling it the grid. Yeah. Well, give me the official name so I don't keep changing what it's called. But yeah, introduce yourselves and let's get to know who you are.
Sure. So I'm Greg Izzo. I'm an earth science teacher at the West Hampton Beach Middle School. Been there for 14 or 15 years. So nice, nice area to be. Love being there and love working with Laurie. And yes, Scott, you can call it the grid. That's what we call it.
Yeah, and so my name is Laurie Ardito, and I am the special education teacher in our ICT, our Integrated Co-Taught Earth Science Regions classroom. And Greg and I have been doing that together for, I think this is what, our 7th year?
I think 7, yeah.
So, what are your something to back up to? Because what are your certifications in?
Go ahead, Laurie.
So I am certified in special ed K to 12. I started out in elementary school, so I have all my elementary certification from K to 6, and I also have my TESOL certification. So I teach E&L students in one of the classes I do every year.
And so for the special ed, it's just more of like a generalist, right?
Yes, it's
Okay.
generalist from middle school to high school. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thankful to be able to have Laurie with me for the majority of the day. She's only Earth during our schedule. So I'm Earth Science certified and general science as well. But since we are fully accelerated in 8th grade, my schedule has been all Earth and 2 integrated co-taught classes and then 1 standalone for myself.
And so you've been working together for 7 years now, Laurie. This was just cool that your whole backstory is like probably a whole episode, probably not for this podcast, but I think that's fascinating. I always like to see how people kind of like weave through life and end up becoming teachers and all that. But how many years now have you been teaching total?
So this is my 8th year at West Hampton because I've been with Greg every year except for my first year there. But this is my, I guess, 12th year teaching because I taught in Waynescott my first couple of years, and then I was at a private school, and then I ended up at West Hampton. And then prior to that, I was doing some consultant coaching for writing, and I wrote the book jacket, like the flap copy, when you get the book in the store and you try to. So I wrote,
Oh, yeah.
and prior to that, I was in book publishing in New York and in Boston, working at all different, everybody from like Eric Carle to Jim Lehrer to, business authors at Harvard.
That's so fascinating. I think it's always so fascinating when you hear. I feel like when people are like, "Oh, what do you do?" You're like, "I'm a teacher." That's really all. You get it. We've all been to school, right? But then you hear what other people do, and they're like, "My job is so boring. I did this, that," and I feel like every teacher's like, "Wow." It's always so interesting. Cool. So one of the reasons why I asked about the certifications too is even though this is an ed tech podcast mostly, I think that there's a lot to be said too about being a good co-teaching team because it can go really badly. So I'm kind of curious to see how you, before we kind of dive into this grid too, how do you guys work together and how have you found, yeah, like how did you find your way to working well together?
Yeah, I think the first year, of course, we were getting to know each other, but we met prior to the year and had a few sessions where we were able to talk and discuss kind of what our goals were and what we would like to start the year with. And from that point, I would say that a lot of what we did kind of complemented each other. I think the first year we were together, it was a lot of, maybe there was more of me standing in front at times, but we've always tried to do parallel teaching, and we both kind of agree that the best model is when we're both very active with the students. And so as we developed into the grid system, it just lent itself to just now there are 2 experts in the room. You can go to whoever you want. We try to be, as 50-50 split as possible, and there are times when Laurie takes the lead if we're doing a certain activity, and then I'll take the lead at other times, and it's just really a nice partnership. It took I would say not that long to get comfortable with each other because we were both willing to, lean on the other person to have some kind of input or really half of the input.
Yeah.
Yeah, Laura, I would love to hear because I mean, you're not when you say you were a generalist, that was one thing that, that's not easy to come into somebody who's not certified in the subject and then try to figure out how to work that and be comfortable to like teach in front of a class. I mean, that's amazing that you do that.
Well, it's funny because, you never know where you're going to end up, and there's, certain subjects that, I don't know, people might find a little bit easier because it's like, English, oh, it's reading and writing. Not that that's easy because I've done that too, but, earth science is a specialized discipline and a lot of academic vocabulary. And I took the Regents when I was, a million years ago when I took it, but if you're not exposed to it for a while. So there's definitely a ramping up period. But in terms of the co-teaching, I think it's really all about both being flexible, both being open-minded, and both being like respectful of the other person's expertise and being willing to try different things. And just been very fortunate because Greg is open to anything. Like we literally change what we're doing almost on a day-to-day basis. Like, you know what, this didn't work, or a lot of kids weren't getting this. I think we should do this, or reverse the order, or shorten this, or try this. And both of us have always been like, sure, let's do that. So I think it's just very fortunate. I think you have to have both people committed to making it work and to being flexible and spending the time to do whatever the kids are dictating that the needs are.
So, yeah, that's really well said, because I think taking that time to develop a co-teaching team, it's sometimes impossible, because I feel like you hear people that, they're changing co-teachers like they're changing underwear every year. I mean, even to this point, I think I've had 14 different co-teachers. I think, yeah, I finally have almost out-taught it's crazy. I think I've been teaching for 14 years and I've had 14 co-teachers, and I've been lucky to have the same co-teacher now for 3 years. I teach three collaborative earth science, two with one person. And then I have another collaborative section, and that person is kind of rotated a bunch of times. And I have two phenomenal co-teachers, but like you hit the nail on the head. I mean, she's brand new, but she's just willing to do whatever it is. She knows there's a mutual respect. So it's huge to be able to say, I don't think this worked well. What can we do? Being active, being engaged is it's such a game changer. Cause Greg, I don't know, in the past, you've had people that they just want to sit there. They're just like a fly in the wall. And it's like, we're not really helping kids this way.
Yeah, there was only a few other experiences I had. I was a gen ed earth science teacher without, ICT inclusion co-taught classes. So I really didn't know much about co-teaching except for my first year at Port Washington, where I was kind of thrown into a situation with another person, and it was really more me standing and delivering, and she was helping just the cohort. I knew it was my first year teaching full time as a full year, and I said I knew this wasn't the best way to go about it. And then so there was a break between when I went to West Hampton. There was no co-taught classes until I was partnered with Laurie, and so. Talk about walking into a great situation and a brilliant person to work with. It was just an easy match, just both of us willing to work very hard to help the other person out. And it just was, I knew like something, of course, that first experience, something was missing. And then, definitely a great situation now. And we've been left alone too. Like, our principal and our AP and our, our assistant supers and everybody kind of sees that how we work well together. So we're kind of just like, all right, Greg and Laurie are going to be co-teaching next year, So it's nice to have that consistency and know that, they appreciate the relationship that we have and that we can work together so well.
And that they don't want to break it up, because I feel like sometimes that happens, right? You're with somebody and they're like, wow, that person's really good, and we're going to stick them with this other.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And, so when you get your role for the next year, always looking at it like hoping it's the same. But I do think that if something's working, why change it? But it gets changed all the time, depending on the needs of the district and where the holes need to be filled and all of that. So we've been very fortunate that we've been able to stay together, because it just makes sense for the kids. If you have somebody that's new and you can't really help if you don't really understand the content. So the longer you stay together and the more you kind of have time to gel and make all those things work, the better.
Yeah. So what are some ways that you guys collaborating? Because I want to bring this eventually into the grid system, but just to get an idea too of how do you, how does the district sort of set up co-planning? Do you have like a common planning? How often is it? And then two, we all get our little set time that we get to work together, but realistically, I feel like the best co-teaching teams are doing way more than just your 40 minutes a day or every other day or once a week. There's some crazy systems out there. So how do you guys manage that? And what are still some of the bigger challenges?
Yeah, so we have, thankfully, our lunch period matches. So we have, after our earth science cohorts come through, we kind of can reflect on the day right after that. And so we'll sit together and just, make sure that we know what happened today. Was it reflect on it. Was it good? Was it bad? What needs to be changed for the next day? And are we on track for what we are hoping to accomplish by the time, tomorrow's over and the week and whatever else. So we do have that one period every day. We certainly will connect with each other throughout afternoons and evenings, like as needed, reach out to another, what do you think about this? And so we will put in extra time, definitely.
I would especially say when we first started diving into doing the grid, I mean, we were Saturdays, Sundays, because it was, the buildup it was a significant switch. So, I definitely think, you have to be willing to put in the extra time to make it work. And just not even, just touching base on the curriculum aspect, but we co-teach a classroom that has typically at least 50% of the kids have learning challenges or behavior challenges. And, it's just, we laugh because Greg will always say, like, don't go to mom, don't go to dad, and the kids see it as, it really does feel like a very familial environment. And it's very, sort of strict, but nurturing at the same time. You have to connect a lot of times just to be touch points about, like, how did you think so-and-so was doing today? Hey, he's a little off and maybe you need to be with him today. Or maybe, you check in, because sometimes you have to play off of each other. And Greg has great relationships with the kids, and, it doesn't matter, he knows everything about their IEPs and everything about their accommodations and how to work with them. And so it's just really nice because we can constantly play off each other in that respect, not just about the academics, but about their social, emotional, all kinds of needs that they might have in the class.
I think you just hit a really important piece of context. And then Greg, I would love in a minute for you to share your screen, just to add a little bit of context to this too, for people who don't know what this all means as far as what they're teaching and what I teach. So the three of us teach the same class. The difference is they're teaching a universally accelerated earth science class, which is typically a 10th grade or 9th grade. Kind of depends where your school puts it. We were in 9th grade, but so I teach the same classes they do collaboratively or co-taught, but at a 10th grade level. And their district makes all students take this 10th grade class at an 8th grade level. It's really, really common where we live. That kind of stuff happens. It definitely comes with a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous amount of challenges. So I don't think enough credit is ever given to your situation and how you're handling and working with this, and especially with what you're about to show, because it really, to have success in those kinds of circumstances, it's really unbelievable. It's really, really, really hard I'm having such trouble with my 10th graders, and I can't imagine these same kids trying to do this at a younger age. So I wanted to provide that context too, so people kind of understand what this is really looking like.
Yeah. And so before we jump into the actual grid stuff, if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about why we ended up where we ended up, Scott, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So we kept having this same issue of, students not turning in work on time, getting a 0 in their grade book. We had kids that were falling behind, could never keep up. We had other kids that were ahead of the game because, like you said, universally accelerated. So we have so many different levels going on in our room. And we had students that were sitting there reading a book because they were bored after 10 minutes of doing the activity where someone else needed an hour to complete it. So that's kind of where this was born. We were looking for a tool that could reach more kids, because I feel like a lot of teachers say the same thing, and we were saying it before we switched over, that there are kids that I'm not getting through to. They're not getting what they need out of this course. They're always falling behind, or they're not able to keep pace. And so our district had a professional development day where they invited a few of us who were willing to kind of, check out what this was. So a company called Teach Better came in, and their presentation was about this grid method. And we said, well, this sounds good in theory. And it took us a little while to come around. It took us a few months to be like, man, I think we really need to try this. And so what we're going to show you now is what we tried. And then we've been modifying. It's been 5 years that we've been working with this system. So we've been modifying it. And the first year we were together, we were more traditional. And then the second year it was COVID. So we were trying to blast out little pre-recorded videos, recording things at midnight at our house and blasting it out to the kids for the next day. And so we were putting in the extra time. And so we kind of did the legwork. And then we realized, wow, this could really, really work for us. And so when that tool came out, it just makes so much sense.
That's awesome. And while you're bringing up your screen, Laurie, maybe you can kind of jump on this question to start. So you showed the kids this thing. Like, what was it? What was that reaction like when you're like, "Here, kids," because this is not a typical thing that happens in classes. So, yeah, while Greg is bringing that up,
Yeah, well, it's funny because you know, COVID had so many horrible, traumatic aspects to it. But honestly, I think it was COVID that kind of made this work for us, or at least enabled us to push forward, because we were forced as educators, right, to move out of our comfort zone and use all this technology because the kids were not in front of us. They couldn't see us. And so we had already recorded, all the Earth Science guys were recording ed puzzle videos on every single unit and every single topic. So we had this cache of videos, with their teachers doing it. And Greg and I had already started talking about a flipped classroom. So we started out actually with that model the first year that we started the grid, and we jumped into the grid literally halfway through the year because we were going to wait until the next year. And then we were like, you know what? We should just try it because we have all these resources between us being in an ICT classroom. We had a million different multiple modalities and manipulatives and Nearpods and Cami this and, so many things that we had to use that we could put the grid together. So we decided to kind of just try it. The thing about the kids, and, typically kids are kind of like, a lot of teachers complain that, they want to be spoon fed the information. And that is true. That sort of became the student that we had in front of us in large part. But, when we introduced the grid, it was kind of like, we introduced it with all of the great selling points, just like you're trying to, sell a car, tell them all the good things about it, like, hey, how would you like to not have homework? Hey, one of the things we always start out with is raise your hand if you've ever been in a classroom where you had no clue what the teacher was talking about and they just kept going on and you were lost. And so you just kind of gave up and started playing Tetris or thinking about what you're doing after school. And every hand pretty much goes up. Or
I was going to say there was probably a lot of kids
like, were you talking to us?
Like 1,000%. And then conversely, have you ever been in a class where you were so bored out of your mind because within 5 minutes you already understood what you were supposed to do, had all the problems done, and then, to keep you busy, the teacher kept giving you more problems that you already knew how to do and you were bored, right? So in the traditional classroom, like the truth is that you're really only reaching a few kids and then everybody else is kind of not where they're supposed to be. And the whole point is trying to be meeting them where they are. So we tried to sell it right off the bat selling point. And hey, how would you like to have no homework in a high school level Regents course? Do you think that's possible? Well, yes, it is. And then, and then we just launched into really, Greg and I are very, very big on explicit instruction and explicit modeling of every single thing that we do with the kids. And that's really how we kind of threw them into it. They all have the grids in front of them on a piece of paper, and we explain every single step. And then we just tried it, and we had to keep on, reversing course and backtracking and changing things as we went. For the most part, I don't think it's such a huge sell. I think that, it was definitely a learning curve, but I think the kids bought into it, fairly quickly.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
And I think, once they get into it, then they're like, wow, all right, I'm not being rushed. I'm not being held back, and I can just keep moving. So I'll show this, I'll zoom in a little bit. I wanted to show the whole thing first, just to kind of look what the setup is. And so the grid starts on level 1 at the bottom left corner. And you'll see that in those gray boxes, there's targets that they can actually accomplish by the end of that level. For level 1, I can identify and define the processes that shape Earth's surface. And every activity that they build across from left to right is something that will, add to that and make sure that they've mastered that idea. They can identify and define by the end of that level. And then they build their way up level 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is I'd say one of the prettier ones. When we first started this, it was a lot of, black and white text. And what we've done is we've also specifically marked where the quizzes were with a color. In this case, it's green in the box. And then where the labs will be and other activities where there's certain color that means something to the kids as they work their way through. So you'll also see things like the teacher initials. So we've gotten rid of a lot of our graded assessments. In lieu of that, we would do something like a one-on-one or one-on-two check-in, a conference where we can have a verbal conversation with the kids and they can demonstrate, yes, I know this. I can check myself off through this. I've mastered this content and I'm ready to move on to the next box. So the kids are really coming up to us and conferencing a lot more than we're chasing them around and hunting them down for work that they need. So if you have any questions, feel free, stop me at any time.
So what would that, let's just say for, that learning objective one, like the vocab. So when you're doing the initials and like, are you giving them some quick quizzes, like a verbal quiz? Like how do you...
So with weathering vocabulary, one, a question that we might ask them is that they sit down in front of us. I'm ready for my conference, Mrs. Ortio or Mr. Rizzo. And I'll say, okay, tell us the difference between physical and chemical weathering. And then they, if they can, great. If they were like, whoa, I sort of know, but I'm not sure. Okay, go back. Let's, take a little bit of time. You're not quite ready yet. Review a little bit more. Come back when you're ready. And there's a lot less pressure. We certainly are not going to yell and scream at them if they don't know it right away, but it kind of gives them a little bit more ownership. They know at this point of the year that they have to come up and be ready to either conference or take an assessment or prove or demonstrate some way. Like we have usually a list of questions that we'd like to target, and we give them one or two, and you can usually tell in their first answer or at the most their second answer, do they really know their stuff or not? And so, we will initial only when we feel that they've mastered what they need to know and ready to move on. And then they always have this paper copy in front of them, and we will sign. And so we know each other's signature. We know, if we actually signed it or not. And they'll only be able to move on. And then, like, they might check in with me for 1A, and then 1B, they're going to go conference with Laurie for 1B, and so they'll have multiple signatures, which is really nice because we're kind of connecting with all of the kids in the room at some point. Go ahead, Laurie, and stop me if you need.
I was going to also just say really quickly, too, for Laurie, it's also nice, too, because that way both of you are being seen as that equal in the room, which is like the goal, right? Is to like, okay, you're being co-taught. We have two people, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about how that goes, but realistically with two people that are confident in the content and in teaching, like that's huge. You don't want to feel like you're undervalued. So it's awesome that, kids are going up. And then Laurie, I'm going to add to what you're about to say, just with a kind of a question, if you could throw it in there too, is, one of the things that came to my mind is, all right, well, what happens if you have a lot of kids that just finish their vocab at the same time and like, they need to get their initials to go out. So how do you guys manage an overflow?
Yeah. So, I love I was so excited when we moved to this model because like Greg had mentioned earlier, if you have two teachers in the classroom that you are paying to teach kids, there is no better use of our time. From bell to bell, Greg and I are interacting with kids, and we're not teaching at them. We're facilitating their own learning that they are coming to us when they're ready at whatever activity they're working on. So, the day goes by like that, and it's really amazing. However, there are times that like 4 kids will be ready or 6 kids will be ready, especially that first activity. It's like when the runners line up at the track and they're all in the same spot for like a half a second, and then somebody pulls ahead and then somebody's falling behind. So that first couple of days is them working on the vocab. So we've kind of managed it in a few different ways. Like sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 kids, no more than 3 usually, come up and we'll conference and like shoot different questions at them to make sure they all know it. But if we have an overflow, that's a great opportunity for us to turn to the other 2 kids and say, look, go quiz each other. You guys are practicing and you're getting ready for us while we're talking to these kids. So that's just more exposure for them to the academic vocabulary. A lot of times they're really not ready the first time they come up, so they kind of get that opportunity to practice a little bit. And then once we move off that 1A activity and they're jumping into the other activities, it just all starts to gel. And kids are in all different places doing all different things. And Greg and I really never have to chase somebody down and say, I need to sign your grid. They are coming up to us. Like, it is so important to them to get that little signature. It's like our stamp of approval that they are able to move on, and it's meaningful to them. So it really, once we get going, the grid is moving, and you could walk in any day and you could have kids on level 1, 2, 3, and they're all just doing their thing. And like I say, we're facilitating and they're doing it.
So do you have to worry ever that like I love that. I want to try to figure out how to do something like this because you're right. I think something I was popped into my head, but it just like flew out like the butterflies because of ADD. What's also great is I think you nailed that. You already had all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you sat here and you're like, oh my God, I got to make this whole grid system worth of thing. You had the stuff laying around and you just found a place to put it, which really, I mean, this is very similar to what a hyperdoc is, where it's kind of like this is like your tree trunk and then you're branching off to do all these other activities and you're coming back, but you don't have to necessarily make it all brand new. That something like this is completely adaptable for all the things that you've made until our curriculum switches and we have to just dump it next year. But like some of it won't have to go, which will be good.
Yeah, well, Scott, you're right about that, and also like, you know, that was the biggest hurdle I think for us is wow, we're gonna make an activity for every single thing, and even things like you'll see things with like quizzes and scores, and like what we realized was we would give a big quiz to the whole group and it would be 15, 20 questions of region style questions, right? And what would end up happening is that, again, that would take a whole period because we had accommodations. We had kids that, you know, would like to take their time. So it's almost like you're wasting the whole period just on what's supposed to be a short quiz. And now what we do is, all right, you're ready for the quiz? Okay, here's 5 questions or 10 questions, and you have to demonstrate that, yes, you need to get 4 out of those 5 right to get your 80%, which we've kind of used as our mastery point is 80%, just because, you know, we know there's a slight curve to the earth science regions and that, you know, that bumps them up into the mid 80s at least. So that we felt that was a really good demonstration of mastery. So the kids, knowing that there's only 5 questions, might take a little extra time to review prior to coming up, and then they'll crush those 5 questions, you know. And we're not doubling it up.
At 85, you would have to have some ridiculous number of questions to be able to even get an 85%, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing that we actually didn't bring up before is that a big aspect of mastery learning is the opportunity to retake an assessment until you reach mastery. And that's a thing that I think a lot of teachers get hung up on, that it's not fair, or, you know, it's, you know, the kids should prepare beforehand, but, you know, they're 13, 14, and they're just learning these executive functioning skills and making the connection between effort and time put in and, you know, that grade at the end. But one thing that, you know, we really see, at least in our district, is that the grades are so important to the kids, but doing the mastery learning in the way that we do, it really does start to make them value the journey of getting there. And the other aspect that it took us a while to because it was, you know, this is a very different way of grading. It's a very different way of delivering instruction. But let's say, for example, we're doing, you know, weathering, erosion, deposition, and everything on the test was right except they mixed up, you know, deposition through coastal processes. Okay, let me give you 2 more questions on that, because everything else you've already shown me, you know, and that takes 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and they come back and they know that, and then they move on. You know, so that piece has been kind of a revelation to us as well.
And we're never given the same quiz twice. Like if the retake is totally unique questions compared to the prior, you know, first attempt. And you'll see even in some of these boxes that we have multiple retakes, because over the years we've realized, you know, this is one that maybe the kids will struggle with and we need to have, you know, an extra one here or there. But there's always a reteach sheet. There's always some kind of activity that they have to go back and do to actually solidify their knowledge, other than, you know.
Can you show like what a retake or the reteach? And also, so do the kids have a digital copy of this too?
They do not. We control all the links. They have the paper copy, and then we'll post directly to Google Classroom, for instance. But if I zoom in here, you'll see like, all right, so they have to go back to their notes. They have to actively utilize their notes to fill in these graphic organizers, you know, try to put these terms in the correct column. And this will allow them to then build back through. And you'll see some diagrams that you recognize, you know, from some regions diagrams. We always like to throw that on there because they need to be able to analyze these things. So this, you know, they'll do every little thing. And to Laurie's point before, like if they only got the soil material incorrect and they needed a little reteach with that, we'd say, all right, just do this part. just do the soil part and then come back and show me that you've interacted and then answer these 2 questions on soil,
Cool. So just to paint that picture then, so the things that are in the grid, you would post that all on your Google Classroom and
Yes.
So I guess assignments that would be like LO 1A and okay.
Mirrors this. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So classroom just mirrors, LO1A, LO1B, or two, it's all in the same order. But, the reason that we chose to do it on paper, honestly, is that the kids can see what's hyperlinked. And like Greg said, there's color coding to the different activities. But one of the things that we found is that, we are so fortunate. We're a district where everybody has a laptop, but it's also a detriment because the kids are so addicted to their screens and they're looking at screens all day long. And then they go home and they're on their phones. So we really kind of made a conscious decision to make technology a very purposeful thing in the grid. They use it for research. They use it to watch videos. They use it to do things that they need the laptop to do. But other than that, they're talking about the academic vocabulary. They're working on a lab. They're working on a model. They're sketching in their notebooks. We really found that using all these multiple modalities and all this different ways of being exposed to the content has made a big difference, even for kids that read at a 3rd grade level or, have trouble decoding the words. It's made a big difference. So we don't want to use technology just to use technology. We really liked having the control of what they're using it for and when they're using it.
So then just because now I'm curious, so how does the color coding work as far as, because I'm assuming what they see is black and white?
No, we have color printers.
Well, you print out in color,
we do. We're the ones that are using all the color ink in our building mostly.
Okay. There's definitely a lot of hate for some of the people that are watching. Like, they get to print this out for all these kids in color.
Well, we do have it in the
faculty room. That
was
my curiosity.
You might do that a little bit on the QT, but every single, in the beginning, we had a paper assessment for almost every single box, because we were still in that traditional mindset. And like Greg said, it was 20 questions. Those 20 questions then became our 3 retakes because we just broke it up, the first one was 5 and the second, because it was all the same, different ways of asking questions about the same content. So, it started to become like, okay, well, just how do we restructure this material to provide multiple opportunities while still allowing the kids to demonstrate that they understand the concept? And that's when the conferencing came in. And Greg and I say all the time, I think the conferencing is our favorite part of all of this, because you can't fake talking to someone about something. Like, if you can't explain it, you just, if they're taking the same paper assessment, there's always the chance that so-and-so is going to say, hey, number 2 is A, in passing as they're, taking their assessment in the back. But if they're standing in front of Greg or I and we say, explain the difference between physical and chemical weathering, and they can't do it, they can't do it. So that means they have to go back and they have to interact with the information and use some other way to be able to understand and explain.
So for the quizzes, like that first 1D weathering quiz, is that everyone's taking this, or is it like you're coming in the back, you're doing this little quiz? Like, I guess, how do you kind of lessen the chance of like, okay, A, B, C, C, A, like on the way back out?
Well, for number one is we are always including in our quizzes like a drawing or a labeling. Like, so for instance, on the weathering quiz, they might have to draw, if you have a sharp angular sediment that rolls down a stream for, a certain amount of time, what will it look like at the end? So they'll have to take that image and they'll have to draw it rounder and smoother, So we try to have a little bit more of the, fill-ins and a little free response. And even if it's something that we make up on our own that's not pulled from a Regents database, like, as long as we know that it's targeting that standard that they need to know, then for us it works, and it's definitely, that alleviates some of those issues. We also have to be very targeted about where we are in the room as well. We have back walls and side walls that actually are meant for like 1990s computers, and so the computers are now no longer there, and there's like these little higher seats where they sit along, with little dividers, and they're facing away from everybody, so it's kind of nice. And if we're in the vicinity, then they just focus on what they're supposed to do. And then it's so quick. It's 5 quick questions, and if they know it, they should get 100. So, there's a lot of ways we can do that. our classes thankfully aren't overloaded, and I think that's one of the reasons we've been very successful in our district as a whole, is just because we might have 20 kids in a room, but that would be our highest. And we have a class this year that we're so thankful to have. We have 11 students.
Wow.
It's
so nice.
I don't know
Unheard
how
of.
I don't know how the schedule worked out that way, but we hit the jackpot with that because they're a really nice crew, and small group
It's
you
so
usually get.
manageable.
Yeah. And you can get a little bit more of, you get a family feel kind of, which can have its challenges as well. But, we've been very, very lucky with our numbers over the past couple of years, I would say.
How do you pace this out? Because I think that's also going to be a challenge for a lot of people. Is like, how do you make sure that this doesn't take forever?
Yeah. So on the second page, and Laurie, please jump in anytime because you're even better at this than I am. So we've paced this out in terms of like what we think that an average pace will look like. So the kids have on the front of their page on their grid, they have the actual grid itself. And then on the back of that page, they have a little reflection sheet along with the pacing. And so in this one, we actually even color coded. You can see the darker or brighter blue is all level 1 stuff. So they can kind of think about where will I be at the end of level 1. And in this case, it was March 12th. So then their level 2 is a slightly different color, and they're working through. And we try to pace it out for doubles and singles and which day is which. And then this would be, like I said, an average pace. So we try to, over our experience, leave it as an average student will finish level 3 by this day. And then the test will be either the next day or the day after, depending on.
And that would be
review.
everybody.
Right. And so this test, you'll notice, is at level 3. And we feel that the way we've built this is to have success on this Chapter 9 test, in our case, you really need to have experienced everything through 3B to get to that mastery grade on the Chapter 9 test. And so we've built them so that each box takes about a period, maybe a little bit more, depending on what it entails. But usually, if you're working one period per, one box per period, you end up right on track with the average pace kid. And then everybody takes the Chapter 9 test on the same day at the same time. And I like to use the analogy of, a doctor can practice surgery however many times that they need to on, whatever, a dummy or whatever. And then when it comes game time, when it comes like, all right, I need to execute this surgery, like that's your assessment. You have to know your stuff at that time. So everybody, that's the day, that's the test, that's the surgery date. Like you have to be able to be prepared at the Chapter 9 test. And it's happening for everybody, same time, same place, all at once.
And that's accountability too, right? I mean, the only non-negotiables about the grid is we start at the same place and we end at the same place, and those dates are set in stone. But what you do in between is really up to you. And that's where the levels 4 and 5 come in, because, we have those students that have done absolutely phenomenal work, blowing our minds sometimes with what they do, because you're more independent, you're doing research, you're building a model, you're designing something, you're expanding your thinking beyond what we've talked about and discussed in class. So we have never had anybody that is done ahead to the point, because once they get to 4 and 5 and they come back to us with, let's say, level 4, and they looked at an article and they give us a paragraph of paraphrased information, they say, I'm done. And we say, okay, well, you're not getting any credit for it, but if you want to really get credit, then you have to go back and you have to do something better, and you have to do something more higher order thinking, and you have to do your own research and, all of those different kinds of things. So, and we're fortunate that our librarian has tools down in the library, like there's a green screen, there's like podcast microphones set up. So we've had kids do like their earth science podcasts. Like last year, there were 2 girls that had like a series of podcasts on different topics, and they would play off one another for all the different topics in the grid. And this year we've got a kid that's like a phenomenal with iMovie and time lapse, and just a brilliant kid. And the things that he's doing are so engaging and so because really special ed is also supposed to be gifted, and we're also always so busy like worrying about trying to lift the other kids up that we're just like hoping those gifted kids take care of themselves. But the beauty of the grid is that differentiation is built in for everyone. So
Yeah.
that part is pretty cool.
And the level 4 and 5, the kids who get there, they get so frustrated because a lot of times we'll say, hey, great first attempt, and then they have to go back and they have to modify it. Like we tell them, you're graded on your effort on the grid. And one thing, I don't know if we mentioned, we have a test grade for the test, but we also have a work ethic grid grade in terms of how far and how accurately did you work through this grid and show us your effort. And if your effort is there and you hit the mark all the way up to level 5, you're getting an extra 100 test grade. Your
Can you
grade.
actually scroll down to that? Is that so? I was going to ask you about that. Is that like a self-reflection? Or
This is dedicated, like, so it says current task. They'll compare themselves to the average pace, and so they'll write their current task, and then they'll see, okay, am I ahead? Am I on pace? Am I behind? And then they actually demonstrate their own work ethic for the day. Like, was I really distracted today and I did nothing? I'm a 1. Was I really good today for the most part? I got distracted for 5 minutes. All right, maybe I'm a 4. And so that gives them a little ownership. And so the last 2 minutes of every single period, we're concentrating on this. All right, so what's my current task? How did I work today? And then what's my plan of action? Am I giving myself homework? Am I going to extra help? Am I working, watching the next video at home because I want to get even further ahead? So the plan of action is just something really quick, short sentence. What am I doing between now and the time class starts tomorrow?
and then how do you match that with what you're seeing? So this way, a kid's just not going, "Yep, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5."
Well, we start off with nobody's a 5 every single day, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Laurie.
Don't you hate when you watch, especially like Netflix today, and they get to the point and you're so excited to see what happens, and then all of a sudden the episode stops and you have to wait? Well, hopefully I created the same amount of suspense. I thought this was going to be a 20-minute interview, and it ended up being, I think, an hour and 25 minutes, but they have so much amazing information to share. They are truly talented educators, and I can't wait for you to hear part 2. So drop a follow to the EdTech Tactile podcast. If you're curious about other EdTech information, maybe some tips, some tutorials, check out the Azar Sciences YouTube page, and check us out hopefully next week, where I will also be adding a whole bunch of resources. Greg and Laurie have been kind enough to share an example of a grid with how they set up the links and everything to share. And so I'll have that next week for you. But until then, thank you so much for coming by, and I can't wait to have you back.